If you love making toys, you'll find this project irresistible. The plans are from toymakingplans.com, and they call it Wild Woody's Cruisin Diner. There's a restaurant with golden arches and lots of cars and trucks to pull in for a quick meal. The diner and vehicles are all brightly painted. Kids will have fun playing with this set for hours. Plus, it's easy enough for even a beginner on the scroll saw to make. I love making toys. I hope you like making them too. And it's fun to watch kids play with them after you've made them. This one I've made before. I gave this set to my grandchildren a few years, 2, 3, 4 years ago. I can't even remember now. It's a lot of fun because you're making all these little vehicles. So here's what I did. I've got the plans, made copies. The parts for the diner are mostly quarter inch. The vehicles are 3/4 inch thick material, and the fenders are 1/2 inch thick material. So I'm going to make this all out of poplar because I'm going to paint the cars. That gives me a chance to use a whole bunch of different colors. As I mentioned, the vehicle bodies are all cut from 3/4 inch poplar. I used scroll saw tape to attach the patterns to the wood and cut the longboard they were on into several sections short enough to be manageable on the scroll saw. I based my blade size choice on the thickness and hardness of the wood, plus the complexity of the pattern, and for these vehicle bodies I'll be using a number 9 Pegasus modified geometry blade. I drilled the pilot holes before bringing these over to the scroll saw because I always make the interior cuts first. It's much easier to cut out the spaces for the windows from a large blank than from the small shape of a vehicle that's already been cut. I started with the interior cut on one of the cars. It's a simple shape that only takes a few seconds to make. After completing that cut, I moved the blade to the next vehicle, made the inside cut there, and then proceeded to do the same to the third vehicle on that wood block. I could just as easily have made the inside cut on a car and then moved on to the outside cut before moving on to the next vehicle. Other than making the interior cuts first, and for these patterns it's a matter of preference rather than necessity, the order in which you make your cuts doesn't matter. This is a good time to mention 2 accessories I use with my Pegasus scroll saw. I use a lighted magnifier, although I don't use the light when recording video because it's too bright and washes out the picture. The second accessory is a foot switch, something you obviously can't see as I'm working. The saw plugs into the switch and the switch into a wall outlet. This is called a dead man switch. The saw only runs while you're pushing down on it with your foot. This allows you to keep both hands free to control the workpiece, and you can quickly stop and start the saw at any time. I made the interior cuts on another set of cars, but there was no need to show that here because it was the same repetitive procedure. It was time to make some exterior cuts to complete the car bodies. I usually start on the bottoms first, but where you start doesn't matter. The first car I cut had 3 sets of windows, indicating it was a passenger van. These cars only take a minute or 2 apiece to cut, so I made quick progress on cutting the cars and 2 little trucks. Of all the toy sets I make, I believe this one has the most cars and trucks, but since they're so quick and easy to make, this project is not time-consuming. That may not be a factor if you make this set as a gift for a child or grandchild, but I'm making toys to sell. If the project takes a long time to make, it will either become very expensive to cover labor costs, or I'll earn very little for my labor time if I keep the price low. I decided to cut the parts for the diner next. There are 2 arches, a roof, and a floor, all made from 1/4 inch thick poplar. I started cutting at the left side of an arch and followed the curved line to the bottom on the other side. I went past the slot for the roof. I'll come back to that later. Rather than making the 90-degree angle at the bottom of the arch, I kept cutting until I reached the wood's edge since it was so close by. Then I made the quick horizontal cut for the bottom and the 90-degree cut for the line that followed the inside arch's curve. I followed that line around to the bottom left of the arch and, this time, made the 90-degree turn to complete the arch. Now I was ready to make the slot for the roof. The slot's width and end must be accurate to have a good fit for the roof. If the slot's too narrow, the roof won't fit inside it, but if it's too wide, the fit will be sloppy and not hold together well. You can't make up for a sloppy fit with extra glue. I cut one side of the slot and then backed the blade out. I cut the parallel line and made the 2 90-degree corners at the end of the slot, and it was complete. I cut the second arch similarly, with the difference that the slots in each arch were of different lengths. The next logical part to cut was the roof. It had 2 slots, each of different lengths, to accept the arch supports. Once again, the cuts for the slots needed to be accurate and for the same reasons as before. I cut the long perimeter first, and then I cut the slots. I used my usual technique for cutting 90-degree corners in the slots. I cut right to the intersection, then backed the blade up slightly, just enough so it wasn't cutting. I used the saw blade's curve just created, plus the waste area to turn the material to the next direction I wanted to cut, and then I pushed the wood into the blade again. The last part for the diner was the floor, simply a square with rounded corners. I made quick work of that, and then cut the last 1/4-inch parts, the sides for the 2 trucks. There were also truck beds. I made those with 1/8-inch Baltic birch plywood. It isn't easy to plane stock that thin, so I use plywood. Now that the parts for the diner and the vehicle bodies were cut, I could cut the fenders. Each car has 2 sets. One of the trucks has 2 front fenders, and the other doesn't have any. These parts were all cut from 1/2-inch thick poplar, so I changed the blade from a number 5 to a number 7 Pegasus modified geometry blade. I could have used a number 5 blade on these, but these shapes are simple and a number 7 will cut faster. When you're running a business, time is money. Also, over time, I've developed a personal preference for using the larger blade of the 2 when the choice is on the border of 2 sizes. Your personal preferences may or may not be the same as mine. There are many parts to this project, and with them all cut, I can move on to the glue-ups. These plans from toymakingplans.com include full-size assembly diagrams for each car and truck. Many of the car and fender shapes are similar, so these pages are invaluable at this step of construction. I use the pages to determine which set of fenders goes with each car body. I placed the car body on the pattern and then put 2 wheels on axle pegs and inserted them into the axle holes. This ensures that I align the fenders properly. I've found through experience that placing the fenders by eye is not a good idea. If you put the fender too close to the wheel may rub against the fender and not turn properly. You don't want to give a child a car with wheels that don't turn. I like to use a small glue bottle to squeeze a bead of glue onto the fender side, and then I use my fingertip to spread it evenly. Once that's done, I press the fender in place on the car side, and I set it aside to dry. It's best to do one side, let the glue dry, and then flip the car over to do the other side. I also use wheels and axle pegs to orient the fenders on the second side. I did a dry fit with the diner parts. I need to paint them before I glue them together because the arches will be yellow and the roof will be blue. It's much more efficient to spray paint these than to use a brush, so that's how I'll paint these parts. The fit was snug, maybe a little tighter than a perfect fit, but not so tight that I wanted to make any adjustments. Sometimes it's best to leave things alone. I took the pieces apart carefully because I didn't want to break anything. I'll take these pieces to the paint booth, followed by the cars and trucks after they are complete. The diner was a little challenging to put together, and I was nervous that I'd break a part or two, but I didn't. If you decide to build this, you'll need to be spot on with your cuts for the diner parts. The vehicles were all easy to make if you follow my tip to ensure proper placement of the fenders. As always, I appreciate your comments, and I respond to every one of them. Please give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, as that sends a positive message to the YouTube algorithm. If you're ready to watch more videos, 2 suggestions for what to watch next are on the screen.